just walk in here and act like you belong?
What is this, officer?
I've seen your type come in, linger, and try to walk out with merchandise.
I didn't take anything.
Shut up! Don't make it worse! People like you don't get special treatment in my store!
At 2:17 p.m., inside Fontaine's boutique, an upscale prom and formal wear shop in the heart of Glenfield's whitest shopping district, a black woman in jeans and a Howard University sweatshirt was slammed against a display case and handcuffed in front of her 7-year-old daughter. The girl was still wearing a $1,200 gown she had been trying on moments earlier. She was crying. Her mother was not. The man who put the cuffs on was Officer Rick Tully, an off-duty cop moonlighting as private security, badge clipped to his belt, hand already on his weapon before he even spoke a word. He told her she matched the description of a shoplifter. She didn't. He told her she was being detained for trespassing. She wasn't. He told her to stop resisting. She hadn't moved. What Rick Tully did not know, what he hadn't bothered to find out before putting his hands on a woman browsing dresses with her child, was that the person he just forced to the ground was federal judge Nadine Calloway of the United States Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, one of the highest-ranking judicial officers in the country. A woman whose rulings had shaped civil rights law for over a decade. And in exactly 12 minutes, every phone connected to her chambers, the U.S. Marshals Service, and a federal investigations unit would be ringing simultaneously. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because the next story is one you don't want to miss. Officer Rick Tully was 43 years old and had spent 16 years with the Glenfield Police Department. In that time, 19 formal complaints had been filed against him. Racial profiling, excessive force, unlawful stops, every single one had been reviewed by Internal Affairs and dismissed. Tully had never been suspended, never been disciplined, never even been required to attend additional training. He had learned years ago that as long as he framed his actions as responding to suspicious behavior or protecting private property, the department would back him without question. Off-duty, Tully worked private security at Fontaine's Boutique, a high-end formal wear shop in a predominantly white suburb where prom dresses started at $800 and wedding gowns ran into the thousands. The boutique's owner had hired him specifically to maintain what she called the right atmosphere. Tully understood exactly what that meant. In 2 years of working the floor at Fontaine's, he had stopped, questioned, or removed 31 people. 29 of them were Black or Latino. Not one had ever been charged with a crime. He saw himself as the gatekeeper, the man who decided who belonged in spaces like this and who didn't. And on this particular Sunday afternoon, when a black woman in sneakers and a college sweatshirt walked through the front door with a teenage girl, Tully made his decision before they reached the first rack. Judge Nadine Calloway was not the kind of person who announced herself when she walked into a room. Outside the courtroom, she moved through the world quietly. No security detail, no driver, no entourage. She wore her authority on the bench and left it there when she stepped down. At 46, she sat on the United States Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, one of the most powerful federal courts in the country, just one step below the Supreme Court. Her rulings on civil rights, police accountability, and constitutional protections had been cited in legal textbooks and referenced in congressional hearings. But none of that had come easily. Nadine had grown up in a 2-room apartment in southeast Washington, D.C., raised by a single mother named Vivian, who cleaned office buildings from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. Vivian never missed a parent-teacher conference. She never let Nadine see her tired. She pressed her daughter's school uniforms on a board balanced between the kitchen counter and the stove and told her the same thing every morning. "Be so good they can't look past you." Nadine listened. Full scholarship to Howard University, top of her class at Yale Law School, federal clerkship with a judge on the D.C. Circuit, 7 years of civil rights litigation with the ACLU, winning cases that forced police departments across 3 states to reform use of force policies. Appointed to the Fourth Circuit at 39 by presidential nomination, confirmed by the Senate with bipartisan support. But today, none of that existed. Today, she was just a mother in a college sweatshirt driving her daughter to a boutique she had found online, planning to surprise her with any prom dress she wanted. No budget, no restrictions, just a perfect afternoon with her child. Zora Calloway was 17 years old, a junior at Glenfield South Public High School, and the kind of kid who never made noise about who her mother was. Most of her classmates had no idea. She didn't post about it. She didn't bring it up in conversation. When college application essays asked about influential figures in her life, she wrote about her grandmother Vivian, not about a federal judge. Zora was quiet but sharp. She had been captain of the debate team since sophomore year and had placed second at the state championship the previous spring. She worked weekends babysitting for 2 families in her neighborhood and had been saving that money for months toward prom. She had $340 set aside, enough for a modest dress if she found the right sale. She had no idea her mother had been planning this trip for weeks. When Nadine told her that morning to get in the car without saying where they were going, Zora figured it was errands. When they pulled into the parking lot of Fontaine's boutique and her mother said, "Pick anything you want," Zora's eyes went wide. She had looked at this store online but never considered walking in. Everything in the window cost more than she made in a month. This was supposed to be the afternoon she would remember forever. The afternoon her mother made her feel like anything was possible. Instead, it became the afternoon Zora watched a man in a security uniform put her mother in handcuffs on a boutique floor while customers looked away and did nothing. Fontaine's boutique was the kind of store designed to make you feel like you were entering somewhere you had to earn the right to be. Floor-to-ceiling mirrors lined the walls. Crystal fixtures hung from the ceiling. The dresses were arranged by designer, each one displayed like a piece of art on padded velvet hangers with handwritten price tags tucked discreetly behind the fabric. The air smelled like gardenias and new carpet. A sales associate named Kristen met them 3 steps inside the door. Her smile was immediate and practiced. "Welcome to Fontaine's. Can I help you find something today?" Then her eyes moved, down to Nadine's sneakers, across the Howard sweatshirt, over to Zora's braids and ripped jeans. The smile didn't disappear, but it thinned. Her voice shifted just enough to notice. "We do have some lovely pieces on our sale rack toward the back, if you'd like to start there." She gestured past the designer gowns, past the bridal collection, toward a cramped corner near the stockroom where last season's markdowns hung under fluorescent lighting. Zora caught it. She looked at her mother. Nadine didn't flinch. She smiled politely, said thank you, "We'll browse on our own," and walked directly to the main collection. She pulled a beaded navy gown from the rack and held it up to Zora. Then a second dress, champagne-colored with a fitted bodice. Then a third. Zora was already smiling again. Near the entrance, Rick Tully shifted his weight and unclipped the radio from his belt. He pressed the button and spoke low enough that only the store manager on the other end could hear. "Got 2 in here that don't look right. I'm keeping eyes on them." He let the radio click off and folded his arms across his chest, watching them move through the store like they had every right to be there. 8 minutes later, Zora was inside a fitting room with the beaded navy gown, the one she had reached for first. Nadine stood outside the door, holding the other 2 dresses over her arm, waiting. She could hear Zora adjusting the zipper behind the curtain and whispering to herself. Through the gap at the bottom of the curtain, she could see her daughter turning slowly in front of the mirror. Nadine was smiling when the shadow crossed in front of her. Tully stopped less than 2 feet away. He didn't greet her. He didn't introduce himself. His eyes went straight to the dresses draped over her arm. "You have a receipt for those?" Nadine looked at him calmly. "I haven't purchased anything. I'm holding them for my daughter to try on. I'm going to need to see some ID. I'm a customer in a store. I'm not required to show identification while I shop." Tully didn't step back. He stepped closer. His hand moved to his belt, not to his weapon, but close enough to make the gesture unmistakable. "Ma'am, you match the description of a shoplifting suspect reported in this store earlier this week. I'm going to need you to put those dresses down and step toward the entrance." There had been no shoplifting report, no suspect description on file. Nothing matching Nadine or anyone who looked like her had been flagged in any system at any point in the store's recent history. Tully had invented it on the spot, the way he had done dozens of times before, because a black woman holding expensive dresses in a store like Fontaine's was all the probable cause he had ever needed. The fitting room curtain pulled back and Zora stepped out wearing the beaded navy gown. It fit perfectly, the kind of dress that makes a 17-year-old stand a little taller without trying. She had been smiling when she reached for the curtain. That smile lasted less than a second. What she saw was her mother pressed against a display case with a man twice her size gripping her left forearm hard enough to leave marks. Nadine's voice was steady but tight. "Remove your hand from me, now." Tully didn't remove it. He squeezed harder and leaned in. "You're not going anywhere until I say so. I've watched you moving through this store concealing merchandise, and I'm not asking anymore." Nadine had concealed nothing. Every dress she had touched was in plain sight, either in her hands or on the rack. Tully reached for his belt with his free hand and unclipped a pair of handcuffs. The metal sound cut through the silence of the store. Zora's hands were shaking, but she pulled her phone from the small bag she had carried into the fitting room and started recording. Tully's head snapped toward her. "Put that phone down right now. You are interfering with a security action." Zora didn't lower the phone. Her voice broke, but the words came out clear. "She didn't do anything. That's my mom. She didn't do anything." Tully ignored her. Around them, the boutique had gone completely still. A white woman near the bridal section pulled her teenage daughter close, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the store without looking back. Two other customers stood frozen near the accessories wall, watching but saying nothing, doing nothing. Not one person stepped forward. Not one person said stop. Tully forced Nadine's arms behind her back and clicked the handcuffs shut in the middle of Fontaine's showroom floor. The sound echoed off the mirrors and marble tile. Nadine did not resist. She did not raise her voice. She stood still and let him do it because she knew, with the precision of a woman who had spent her career studying the law, that every second of compliance made his actions harder to defend. Zora was sobbing now. Her hands trembled around her phone, but she did not stop recording. The camera caught everything, the cuffs tightening, her mother's jaw locked shut, the faces of every customer in the store turning away. The boutique's store manager, a thin woman in a black blazer named Colette, appeared from the back office. She looked at Nadine in handcuffs, looked at Tully, and positioned herself directly behind him. "We have to protect our merchandise. We've had issues before, and Officer Tully is here for exactly this reason." She did not ask what had happened. She did not ask to see evidence. She did not look at Zora standing 5 feet away in a $1,200 gown with tears streaming down her face. Tully grabbed his radio and called for a patrol unit. "I need backup at Fontaine's boutique on Ridgewood. One detained for suspected theft and trespass. Have a second individual on scene refusing to comply with instructions." The second individual was a 17-year-old girl in a prom dress holding a phone. While waiting for the unit, Tully pushed Nadine down into a chair near the entrance. He stood over her and spoke loud enough for the entire store to hear. "People like you come in here thinking you can just take whatever you want. That's not how this works." Nadine looked up at him. She said nothing, but her eyes told him everything he was too arrogant to read. The patrol unit arrived in under 6 minutes. 2 uniformed officers walked through the front door of Fontaine's boutique. The first was Officer Denise Yamada, 36, 9 years on the force, one of only 4 women of color in the Glenfield Police Department. The second was Officer Kyle Pennington, 27, barely 2 years out of the academy, eager to prove himself and instinctively deferential to anyone with more time on the job. Yamada took in the scene in less than 3 seconds, a black woman in handcuffs sitting calmly in a chair by the entrance, a teenage girl in a formal gown standing 6 feet away, phone raised, face swollen from crying, a security officer with his chest puffed out and his hand still resting near his belt, and a store full of people pretending not to watch. Something was wrong, and Yamada felt it immediately. She approached Tully and spoke quietly. "Walk me through it. What's the probable cause?" Tully straightened up. She was acting suspicious from the moment she walked in. Wouldn't show ID when I asked. Got aggressive when I confronted her about merchandise she was trying to conceal. Yamada glanced at Nadine. The woman in the chair hadn't moved. Her posture was straight, her breathing even. She didn't look like someone who had been aggressive about anything. Where's the concealed merchandise? Yamada asked. Tully paused half a second too long. She put it back when she saw me coming. Yamada turned to the store manager. I want your security camera footage pulled from the last 30 minutes. Every angle you have. Colette shifted on her feet. I'd need to check with the owner before I can release anything like that. Pull the footage, Yamada said. It was not a request. Pennington, meanwhile, had positioned himself next to Tully. He nodded along as Tully repeated his version of events, already siding with the man who had 16 years on him without asking a single question of his own. Nadine sat still in the chair with her wrists locked behind her back and waited for a gap in the noise. When it came, she spoke. Her voice carried the tone of someone who had controlled courtrooms for a decade. Calm. Measured. Completely without panic. I'd like to make a phone call. Tully turned and almost laughed. You can make all the calls you want from booking once transport gets here. Yamada stepped between them. She's detained, not arrested. She has every right to make a call. Tully opened his mouth to respond, but Yamada had already turned away from him. She looked at Zora. Can you hand your mother her phone? Zora lowered her own phone just long enough to pull Nadine's from the small crossbody bag hanging off the chair. Her hands were still shaking. She held the phone up to her mother's ear since Nadine's hands were still cuffed behind her. Nadine spoke clearly and without hesitation. This is Judge Calloway. I need you to listen carefully. I am currently being detained in handcuffs at a retail establishment in Glenfield. The address is 412 Ridgewood Lane, Fontaine's Boutique. I need you to contact the U.S. Marshal's Service, notify Chief Judge Harlan's office, and reach David on his personal line. I want a record of this call, logged in chambers immediately. 90 seconds. That was all it took. On the other end of the line, her chief clerk had already picked up a second phone. Within moments, 3 separate lines of communication were active. The Marshal's Service was alerted. The Chief Judge of the Fourth Circuit was being briefed. A personal attorney was en route. Across the boutique floor, Tully had gone quiet. He hadn't caught every word, but he had caught enough. Fourth Circuit. Chambers. Marshal notification. His arms unfolded slowly. His jaw tightened. He didn't know exactly what was coming, but for the first time since he had walked up to Nadine Calloway and grabbed her arm, the certainty in his posture was gone. Exactly 11 minutes after Nadine's phone call ended, a black SUV with federal plates pulled to the curb outside Fontaine's Boutique. 2 men in dark suits stepped out and walked through the front door without hesitation. The first, Deputy U.S. Marshal Vincent Osei, was tall and broad-shouldered, with a credentials case already open in his left hand. The second marshal stayed 1 step behind, scanning the room with the kind of quiet authority that made every person in the store instinctively stand straighter. Osei stopped in the center of the showroom floor. His voice was not loud, but it filled every corner. I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Osei. Who is in charge of this detention? Tully stepped forward. His badge was still clipped to his belt. His chest was still out. But his voice had lost the edge it carried 20 minutes earlier. I'm the one who made the stop. Officer Rick Tully, Glenfield PD, working private security for the store. Osei didn't blink. Officer Tully, you are currently detaining a sitting federal judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. You will remove the restraints from Judge Calloway immediately. The boutique went silent. Not the kind of silence that falls when people stop talking. The kind that falls when the air itself seems to freeze. Tully's face lost its color in stages. First the confidence drained, then the posture collapsed. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Behind him, Colette, the store manager, took 2 full steps backward, as if distance alone could separate her from what she had endorsed. Pennington moved first. He stepped toward Nadine with his hands trembling, fumbled the key into the cuffs, and released them. The metal fell away from her wrists with a click that sounded louder than it should have. Yamada stood apart near the fitting rooms, arms at her sides. She had not uncuffed Nadine because she had not been the one to cuff her, but the look on her face made it clear she had seen the shape of this moment long before it arrived. Nadine stood slowly. She rubbed the red marks circling both wrists, looked once at Tully, once at Colette, and said nothing. Zora stood behind her, phone still raised, still recording. She had not stopped since the fitting room. Marshal Osei did not wait for explanations. He turned to Colette and spoke in a tone that left no room for negotiation. I need the complete security camera footage from every angle in this store covering the last 60 minutes. Every camera, no exceptions. That footage is now part of a federal record. Colette nodded quickly and disappeared into the back office without a word. Tully tried to fill the silence. Look, I was doing my job. She was behaving suspiciously, and she wouldn't cooperate. I had no way of knowing who she was. I followed protocol, and Osei turned to face him. Let me be clear about something, officer. Her title is not what makes this wrong. If she were a teacher, a nurse, or a woman with no title at all, your actions would be exactly as indefensible as they are right now. Her position did not determine whether her rights were violated. You did. Tully closed his mouth. Osei told him he was not to leave the premises. The second marshal was already on a phone call to Glenfield PD dispatch, requesting Tully's commanding officer respond to the scene. Within 40 minutes, the boutique's full security footage had been copied onto a federal evidence drive. Zora's phone video, still running when the marshals walked in, was backed up and logged as a secondary record. Both files were in the hands of federal investigators before the hour was out. Near the front of the store, Colette approached Nadine. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. Judge Calloway, I want to sincerely apologize. This was a terrible misunderstanding, and I never intended. Nadine looked at her. The same eyes that had silenced attorneys in federal courtrooms settled on the woman who had stood behind Tully and told a handcuffed mother that they had to protect their merchandise. You stood behind him, Nadine said, while my daughter watched. Remember that. Colette said nothing else. There was nothing left to say. The investigation moved fast because the evidence didn't require interpretation. It required nothing more than someone finally willing to look. Federal investigators in Glenfield PD Internal Affairs launched parallel inquiries within 48 hours of the incident. The FBI's Civil Rights Division opened a preliminary review. The Department of Justice flagged the case for potential pattern or practice violations. And for the first time in 16 years, someone pulled Rick Tully's full complaint history out of the filing cabinet where it had been buried and read every single page. 19 complaints. 11 years. Each one documented the same behavior. Black and Latino individuals stopped without cause, ID demanded without legal basis, physical contact initiated without provocation, accusations of theft or trespassing made with no supporting evidence, and every single complaint had been reviewed by the same internal affairs unit and closed with the same language, insufficient evidence to sustain. Consistent with department policy, no further action recommended. But the body camera footage told a different story. Investigators reviewed over 40 hours of recordings from Tully's on-duty shifts and found a pattern so consistent it barely needed analysis. In affluent commercial areas, Tully approached Black and Latino shoppers at a rate 7 times higher than white shoppers in the same locations. His language changed, depending on the race of the person he was addressing. His hands went to his belt faster. His tone hardened sooner. It was not unconscious. It was a system. Then the boutique records broke open. Fontaine's internal incident logs showed that Tully had stopped, questioned, ejected, or detained 31 individuals during his 2 years as private security. 29 of them were Black or Latino. Not one of the 31 had ever been charged with a crime. Not one had been found in possession of stolen merchandise. Not one had been convicted of anything. 8 former victims came forward within the first 2 weeks, each describing nearly identical encounters. Stopped without explanation, accused without evidence, humiliated in front of other customers, and escorted out while white shoppers watched in silence. The investigation went deeper. Federal subpoenas pulled Fontaine's internal emails and revealed a written directive from the boutique's owner to Colette and to Tully, instructing them to apply what the emails called enhanced screening protocols to shoppers who fit certain profiles. The language was coded but unmistakable. Non-traditional clientele, atypical demographic presentation, loss prevention priority indicators, Every phrase meant the same thing. Black and brown customers were to be watched, followed, and confronted if they lingered too long near high-value merchandise. It was not a misunderstanding, it was a policy. The consequences came in waves, and each one was heavier than the last. Rick Tully was terminated from the Glenfield Police Department within 10 days of the incident. His badge was collected. His service weapon was surrendered. His access to every law enforcement database in the state was revoked. 2 weeks later, a federal grand jury returned an indictment. The charge was deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal civil rights violation carrying a maximum sentence of 10 years. Prosecutors argued that Tully had used his authority as a sworn officer to unlawfully detain, restrain, and humiliate a citizen based on race while acting in a security capacity directly tied to his law enforcement credentials. Officer Kyle Pennington, the young backup who had stood beside Tully and nodded along without asking a single question of his own, was suspended without pay pending a departmental review. He resigned before the review concluded. His brief career ended not with a dramatic act of misconduct, but with the quiet realization that standing next to the wrong man and saying nothing carried its own weight. Officer Denise Yamada was formally commended by the department and later promoted to sergeant. The commendation cited her adherence to proper procedure, her insistence on reviewing evidence before drawing conclusions, and her decision to allow Nadine her phone call over Tully's objection. It was the only part of the department's response that didn't require an apology. The Glenfield chief of police resigned 5 weeks after the incident, when a federal review confirmed that internal affairs had systematically suppressed or dismissed complaints against Tully and at least 4 other officers over a period spanning more than a decade. The pattern was not an oversight, it was institutional. Fontaine's Boutique was hit with a federal civil rights lawsuit filed on behalf of Nadine and Zora Calloway. A separate class action followed, filed by 9 former victims who had been unlawfully stopped or removed from the store based on race. The boutique's owner issued a public apology through her attorney, calling the incidents deeply regrettable and inconsistent with the values of the business. The apology convinced no one. Within 3 months, a national boycott campaign had drained the store's revenue to near zero. Fontaine's Boutique closed permanently 6 months after the day Nadine Calloway walked through its doors. The city of Glenfield, facing mounting legal exposure and national scrutiny, entered settlement negotiations. The final amount was $2.4 million, paid to the Calloway family. It was the largest civil rights settlement in the city's history. But for Nadine, the money was never the point. The record was, Zora never bought a dress that day. She walked out of Fontaine still wearing the navy gown because no one had thought to ask her to change before the marshals arrived. Nadine draped her jacket over Zora's shoulders in the parking lot and drove home in silence. Neither of them spoke for the entire ride. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the Calloway home. No return address. Inside was a custom-made gown, deep emerald green with hand-stitched beadwork along the bodice and a handwritten note folded beneath the tissue paper. For Zora, you stood your ground when grown men wouldn't. Wear this and know that we see you. It was signed Sisters at Law. 14 black women attorneys from across 3 states had seen the video and commissioned the dress together. On prom night, Zora came down the stairs in the emerald gown with her grandmother Vivian's bracelet on her wrist. Nadine stood at the bottom holding her phone, and for the first time since the boutique, her composure broke. She whispered it just loud enough for Zora to hear. "You were braver than me in that store." Zora shook her head. "I learned it from you." The video was viewed over 10 million times in 4 weeks. It was cited in 3 congressional inquiries into police misconduct. When Judge Calloway returned to the bench, her first case involved a civil rights claim nearly identical to her own experience. She recused herself but entered a written statement into the public record. If a federal judge can be handcuffed without cause in a dress shop in broad daylight, then no citizen is safe from the unchecked exercise of biased authority. The final frame of Zora's footage became the defining image. A mother in handcuffs, a daughter in a prom dress. A phone held steady with both hands. She wasn't just a mother buying a dress, she was the law, and he broke it. If this story moved you, don't just watch in silence. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to see how power, racism, and accountability collide in the real world. If you think this situation was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right-hand side.
Which seat?
3A. Fake federal ID says she's a judge.
Ma'am, stand. Hands where I can see them.
I am Denise Lockhart, United States District Judge. You can verify it right now.
It's fake. You know how they do this. Cuff her.
Hands
Now.
behind your back.
You're making a career.
At 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, a black woman was handcuffed in the first-class cabin of a Sterling Atlantic Airlines flight from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't broken a single regulation. She had done nothing but sit in a seat she paid for, open a laptop, and ask a flight attendant for his name. The woman was the Honorable Denise Lockhart, a United States federal judge with 11 years on the bench, appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. The man who triggered her arrest was Craig Pennington, a senior flight attendant with 8 years at the airline and 31 complaints from passengers of color that his employer had buried and never acted on. He looked at her and decided she didn't belong, and before that plane touched the ground, he would set in motion a chain of events that would cost Sterling Atlantic $3.5 million, end his career, and land him in a federal courtroom on the wrong side of a civil rights charge. Judge Lockhart was 54 years old. She had spent more than 2 decades in law, first as a public defender, then as a federal prosecutor, and for the last 11 years as a U.S. District Judge for the District of Columbia. She was flying home from visiting her elderly mother and was due in chambers the next morning to preside over a high-profile discrimination case. She dressed comfortably. A dark cardigan, reading glasses around her neck, a leather bag with case files, no title on display. She walked to seat 3A, placed her carry-on in the overhead bin, and sat down. She was one of 4 passengers in first class. She was the only one who was black. Craig Pennington stood at the front of the cabin watching passengers file in. He was 46 years old, 18 years with Sterling Atlantic, and held the title of lead cabin crew. Among colleagues, he was known for running a tight cabin, a phrase that in his case meant controlling who got attention and who got ignored. Over 9 years, 31 passengers had filed complaints against him. Every single one was a person of color. The complaints described the same patterns: boarding passes questioned, drink service skipped, seats double-checked. In one case, a black surgeon had been asked 3 times whether he was sure he was in the right cabin. Each complaint was closed without action. Pennington had never been disciplined, never been retrained, never been told to change. That afternoon, he watched Lockhart settle into 3A, and his eyes stayed on her a beat too long. Before the doors closed, Pennington approached her row. "Ma'am, I just need to verify your boarding pass." Lockhart handed it over. He studied it longer than necessary, turned it over, held it at an angle. The pass was clear. First class, seat 3A, paid in full. "There might be a seating error in the system," he said. "I need to sort this out." Lockhart's voice was calm. "There's no error. That's my seat." He walked toward the galley. He didn't check a single other passenger's pass. Not the white businessman in 3C, not the couple in row 2. Only Lockhart. He returned 4 minutes later. "Ma'am, other passengers have expressed concern about a possible mix-up." No other passenger had said a word. Lockhart met his eyes. "I'm where I'm supposed to be." Pennington held the look, then turned and walked away. His expression was tight. Lockhart watched him go. She had been a judge long enough to recognize what was happening. She had also been a black woman long enough to know exactly what it looked like. The flight leveled at cruising altitude, and Pennington began first-class service. He started at row 1, hot towels, drinks, a warm smile. He moved to row 2, same routine. He stopped at row 3, served the white businessman in 3C a whiskey neat in a glass tumbler, exchanged a few words, and then walked past Lockhart without a glance. He continued to the row behind her. The older white couple received their drinks within minutes. Lockhart sat with nothing. She waited. After several minutes, she pressed the call button above her seat. The chime sounded. Pennington was visible near the galley, arranging a tray. He didn't look up. 14 minutes passed before he appeared at her row. Sorry about that. Galley's backed up right now. What can I get you? She asked for a glass of water. He nodded and walked away. She watched him stop at the row behind her, refill the couple's wine, and chat briefly before disappearing into the galley again. 20 minutes later, he returned with her water. It was lukewarm, served in a small plastic cup, the kind used in economy. Every other first-class passenger had crystal glassware. Lockhart looked at the cup, then at Pennington. He was already turning away. A second flight attendant, Nora Saunders, 28, 2 years with the airline, stood near the galley partition. She had watched the entire sequence. Her lips pressed together. She shifted her weight. She said nothing. Lockhart set the plastic cup on her tray table, reached into her bag, and quietly opened the voice memo app on her phone. She placed it face down beside her and pressed record. She didn't announce it. She didn't make a scene. She simply began documenting what she already knew wasn't going to stop. Midway through the flight, Lockhart opened her laptop. She logged into the federal court's secure document system and began reviewing case files for the discrimination trial she was set to preside over the following morning. Her screen showed legal briefs, sealed motions, judicial notes. She worked quietly, the way she had on dozens of flights before. Pennington walked down the aisle carrying a tray of empty glasses. He slowed as he passed row 3. His eyes moved to her screen. He didn't stop, but his pace changed. He looked at the laptop, then at Lockhart, then continued toward the front galley. He set the tray down and picked up the in-flight phone that connected directly to the cockpit. "Captain, this is Pennington. I've got a passenger in 3A I need to flag. She's been behaving suspiciously since boarding. She's accessing some kind of material on a laptop that doesn't look right. I don't think she matches the profile of a first-class passenger." There was a pause. The captain asked if the passenger had been disruptive. "Not yet," Pennington said, "but you know how these things escalate. I'd rather be safe." The captain asked what specifically was suspicious. Pennington hesitated for half a second. "She's just not right. Something's off. I'm calling it a security concern." The captain, following airline protocol that gave lead cabin crew authority to flag in-flight threats, contacted Sterling Atlantic Ground Operations at Dulles. He relayed the crew's concern. Ground Operations contacted Airport Police Dispatch and requested that law enforcement officers meet Flight 4721 at the gate upon arrival. The request was logged as a potential security incident. At 30,000 feet, with no crime committed and no regulation broken, the machinery had already started moving, and Lockhart, still reviewing her case files, had no idea what was waiting for her on the ground. Pennington came back down the aisle 10 minutes later. This time, his posture was different. Shoulders squared, clipboard in hand, jaw set. He stopped at row 3 and looked down at Lockhart. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to close that laptop and stow all personal items immediately. Security protocol." Lockhart looked up from her screen. "Which protocol?" Pennington's eyes flickered. "It's a cabin security protocol. I need you to comply." Lockhart's voice remained even. "There is no FAA regulation that requires a passenger to close a laptop during cruise altitude. I'm not in violation of anything. Which specific protocol are you referring to?" Pennington couldn't name one. His grip tightened on the clipboard. "Ma'am, if you don't comply with crew instructions, I will have you restrained and removed from this aircraft upon landing." The cabin went quiet. The older couple behind her stopped mid-conversation. The man in 1A lowered his newspaper. The white businessman in 3C leaned forward and spoke. "She hasn't done anything. I've been sitting here the entire flight. She's been reading on her laptop. That's it." Pennington's head snapped toward him. "Sir, this doesn't involve you. I'd suggest you stay out of it." The businessman held his gaze for a moment, then sat back, shaking his head. 2 rows behind Lockhart, a woman traveling with her teenage daughter quietly raised her phone and began recording. She angled it carefully, capturing Pennington standing over Lockhart's seat, his posture aggressive, his voice loud enough to carry through the cabin. Lockhart hadn't moved. Her hands were still on the keyboard. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She had spent her career watching people abuse authority. She recognized the pattern. She also recognized that this was no longer just poor service, it was something else entirely. Pennington didn't walk away. He planted himself beside row 3 and raised the stakes. "Ma'am, I'm now going to need you to hand over that laptop. It's being classified as evidence related to a security concern." Lockhart closed the laptop slowly, but kept it on her tray table. Her voice was clear enough for the rows around her to hear. "You have no authority to seize my personal property. I am a fare-paying passenger in a confirmed seat. I have broken no law and violated no regulation. You are not law enforcement." Pennington's face flushed. He turned toward the galley and called out, "Nora, come here." Nora Saunders appeared from behind the partition. Pennington pointed at Lockhart. "I need you to stay here and keep eyes on this passenger in case she becomes aggressive." Nora looked at Lockhart, a 5-4-year-old woman, sitting still with her hands folded on a closed laptop. Nora's mouth opened slightly, then closed. She stepped to the side of the aisle and stood there, arms crossed, visibly uncomfortable. She didn't say a word. Lockhart turned back to Pennington. "I'd like your full name and employee identification number." Pennington stiffened. "That's not something I'm required to give you." She asked again, louder this time, her voice carrying through the first-class cabin. "I am asking for your name and your employee ID. I have a right to know who is threatening me on this aircraft." Pennington leaned in close enough that only she should have heard what he said next. "You're going to regret making this difficult." But 2 rows back, the mother's phone was still recording. The microphone picked up every word. Pennington straightened up and walked back toward the galley. Lockhart sat motionless, her phone still recording face down beside her. She was no longer just a passenger being mistreated. She was a federal judge building a record. The plane touched down at Dulles at 7:12 p.m. Before the seatbelt sign clicked off, Pennington's voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats. We have a brief security procedure before deplaning. Do not stand or open the overhead bins until instructed." The cabin stirred. Passengers exchanged looks. This wasn't normal for a domestic flight. Lockhart sat still in 3A, laptop stowed, hands resting on her lap. She already knew. The forward cabin door opened, and 2 armed airport police officers stepped on board. They were directed immediately to row 3. Officer Vince Delano, 36, led the way. His partner followed a step behind, hand resting near his belt. Pennington intercepted them before they reached Lockhart. He spoke in a low voice, but not low enough. "She's been non-compliant since boarding. Aggressive, refused direct orders from cabin crew. I flagged it as a possible security threat. I'd be careful with her." Delano looked past Pennington toward 3A. He saw a middle-aged woman sitting upright, hands visible, expression calm. No raised voice, no disturbance, no indication of anything resembling a threat. He approached her row. "Ma'am, I need you to stand up, please." Lockhart stood. He asked for identification. She reached into her bag, opened her wallet, and produced a federal judicial ID card. It showed her photograph, her full name, her title, the Honorable Denise Lockhart, and her court, United States District Court for the District of Columbia. Delano looked at the ID. He looked at Pennington, who stood behind him near the galley. He looked back at the ID. The cabin was silent. Every passenger in first class was watching. The businessman in 3C had his jaw tight. The older couple behind her hadn't moved. Delano held the ID in his hand for a long moment, and then he made the worst decision of his career. Delano stared at the ID. Federal Judge, U.S. District Court. The photo matched the woman standing in front of him. Before he could speak, Pennington stepped closer. "She could have faked that. You don't know. People fake things all the time." Delano hesitated. He keyed the radio on his shoulder and called his supervisor. "I've got a passenger in first class." Crew flagged her as a security concern. She's produced a federal judicial ID, requesting guidance. The supervisor, sitting in a dispatch office on the other side of the terminal, had no visual on the situation, no Bodycam footage, no context beyond what he was hearing through a radio. His response was brief. "Bring her in for processing. Better safe than sorry. We'll sort it out on the ground. Delano lowered the radio. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back. Lockhart didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She placed her hands behind her back, palms open. The cuffs clicked shut in the first-class cabin of a commercial aircraft, in front of every passenger still seated. The mother, 2 rows back, held her phone steady. The video captured everything. A 54-year-old black woman in handcuffs, standing straight, face composed, dignity intact. And behind the officers, Craig Pennington stood with his arms crossed, chin slightly raised, watching. The mother's son, a boy of 9, stared at the scene with tears running down his face. His mother leaned close and whispered, "Don't look away. Remember this." Delano and his partner walked Lockhart up the aisle toward the cabin door. Passengers pressed against their seats to make room. No one spoke. She was led through the jet bridge in handcuffs, past gate agents who stopped mid-task, past waiting passengers who turned and stared, past a Sterling Atlantic supervisor who looked at the cuffs and then looked away. Not one of them asked what she had done, because she hadn't done anything. The airport police station was a windowless room on the lower level of Dulles Terminal. Fluorescent lights, a metal table, 2 chairs. Lockhart was seated on one side, hands still cuffed behind her back. She hadn't said a word since leaving the plane. Delano sat across from her with a clipboard. He asked for her full name, Denise Yvonne Lockhart, occupation, United States District Judge, District of Columbia. She gave him her chamber's direct number and the name of her judicial assistant. Delano wrote it down, then stepped out. He made the call from the hallway. Federal court security answered on the second ring. It took less than 3 minutes. The Honorable Denise Lockhart, appointed by the President, confirmed by the United States Senate, 11 years on the federal bench, active caseload including a civil rights trial scheduled to begin the following morning. Delano walked back into the room. The color had left his face. His partner, who had been standing near the door, looked at him once and stepped out without a word. Lockhart watched Delano set the clipboard down. His hands weren't steady. She spoke first. "I told you who I was on the plane. I showed you my identification. You looked at it, and you chose not to listen. Uncuff me." Delano moved behind her and removed the handcuffs. The red marks on her wrists were already visible. He started to speak. "Judge Lockhart, I'm sorry, She cut him off. "Don't apologize to me. That's not what I need from you right now. What I need is for you to document everything that happened on that aircraft and in this room. Every word that flight attendants said to you, every instruction your supervisor gave, every second I spent in these cuffs. Because this is not over." Delano nodded. He picked up his pen. His hand was shaking. The call started before Lockhart left the station. Her senior law clerk, reached by phone at 8:40 p.m., contacted the federal court's administrative office immediately. By 9:15 p.m., the chief judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia was on a call with the Department of Justice. The message was direct. A sitting federal judge had been handcuffed and detained on a commercial flight based on nothing but the word of a flight attendant and the color of her skin. The DOJ Civil Rights Division opened a preliminary inquiry that same night. Agents were assigned. Evidence preservation requests were sent to Sterling Atlantic Airlines, to Dulles Airport Police, and to the airline's ground operations office. Lockhart provided her audio recording, over 40 minutes of continuous documentation, including Pennington's whispered threat, his fabricated security claims, and the moment the cuffs went on. The mother's video surfaced on social media within 24 hours. It was 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. It showed Pennington standing over Lockhart's seat. It showed the officers approaching. It showed a 54-year-old black woman being handcuffed in first class while a flight attendant watched from the galley with his arms crossed. It showed a 9-year-old boy crying. Within a day, the video had 2 million views. By the end of the week, it had passed 11 million. National news networks ran it on every cycle. Legal experts appeared on cable broadcasts calling it one of the most clear-cut cases of racial discrimination on a commercial flight in recent memory. Sterling Atlantic Airlines released a statement. The airline is aware of the incident and is conducting a thorough internal review. We are committed to the safety and dignity of all passengers. The statement said nothing about Pennington, nothing about the 31 prior complaints, nothing about the federal judge they had allowed to be arrested on their aircraft. It said nothing because they were already afraid of what was coming. Lockhart retained civil rights attorney Claudia Ferreira, a former DOJ prosecutor who had built a reputation dismantling institutional discrimination cases with surgical precision. Ferreira filed a federal lawsuit against Sterling Atlantic Airlines, Craig Pennington individually, and the Dulles Airport Police Authority. The claims included racial discrimination, unlawful detention, civil rights violations, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Then discovery began, and what it revealed was worse than anyone outside the airline could have imagined. Internal records showed all 31 complaints against Pennington. Every single one involved a passenger of color. Every single one had been closed without discipline. HR emails between supervisors described Pennington as old-fashioned and a bit rough around the edges, but ultimately harmless. One email from a regional HR manager advised a black woman who had filed a complaint that crew discretion in managing cabin dynamics was standard practice across the industry, and that her experience, while regrettable, did not constitute a policy violation. Training records showed that Sterling Atlantic's entire diversity and inclusion program consisted of a single 4-5-minute online video module. 40% of cabin crew had never completed it. Pennington was among them. But the most damaging evidence came from Pennington's own company email account. He had sent messages to colleagues mocking black passengers seated in first class. One read, "Another one in 2B who clearly used someone else's miles." Another said, "Full cabin today." 3 of them up front, going to be a long flight. The airline had access to these emails. Their servers stored them. Their filters flagged nothing. Their managers saw the complaints pile up year after year and never once connected the dots. They knew who Pennington was. They knew what he was doing. And they did nothing because no one had made enough noise to force them to care. The DOJ Civil Rights Division moved faster than Sterling Atlantic expected. Federal prosecutors reviewed the evidence, the audio recording, the passenger video, Delano's Bodycam footage, Pennington's call to the cockpit, and his statements to the officers on board, and made a decision that would elevate the case beyond a civil matter. They charged Craig Pennington with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. The legal theory was precise. Pennington was not law enforcement. But by contacting the captain, triggering a security alert, directing armed officers to a specific passenger, and feeding them false claims of aggression and non-compliance, he had effectively weaponized state authority against Lockhart. He had used police as an instrument of racial discrimination. That, prosecutors argued, brought his actions within the reach of federal civil rights law. Pennington was arrested at his home on a Wednesday morning. 2 federal agents knocked on his door at 6:15 a.m. His mugshot was released that afternoon and circulated nationally within hours. Sterling Atlantic suspended him immediately, calling it a personnel matter under review. Officer Vince Delano faced a separate reckoning. An internal investigation by the Airport Police Department found that he had seen valid federal judicial identification, heard a flight attendant with no law enforcement authority override that identification, and proceeded with an arrest without independent verification. He was placed on unpaid leave pending the outcome of the review. His partner was reassigned. The Airport Police Department entered into a consent agreement with the DOJ requiring new protocols for all airline-initiated law enforcement requests, including mandatory independent verification of crew claims before any passenger could be detained. The machinery of accountability was now moving on multiple tracks, and none of them were slowing down. The criminal trial began on a Monday in federal court and lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming. They opened with Officer Delano's body cam footage, which showed the moment he boarded the aircraft, Pennington intercepting him in the aisle, the whispered briefing, the walk to row 3, and the handcuffing of a woman who had not moved, not raised her voice, and not broken a single rule. They played the mother's cell phone video. The jury watched a 9-year-old boy cry as a 5'4" black woman was led away in handcuffs while a flight attendant stood in the galley with his arms folded. They played Lockhart's audio recording, 40 minutes of continuous documentation, Pennington's fabricated security protocol, his demand for her laptop, his whispered threat, "You're going to regret making this difficult." They presented his emails, the jokes about black passengers in first class, the language, the tone. Then 7 other former passengers took the stand. All people of color. All had flown Sterling Atlantic and encountered Pennington. One woman described being moved from her first-class seat to economy because Pennington told her there had been an overbooking error. There hadn't been. A black professor testified that Pennington had asked to see his boarding pass 3 times on a single flight while never once checking the white passengers around him. The patterns were identical. The behavior was consistent. The airline had done nothing. Pennington's defense argued he had been following security protocols and exercising professional judgment. The prosecution dismantled this in a single afternoon. They brought Sterling Atlantic's own operations manual into evidence. No protocol existed for what Pennington had done. None. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Craig Pennington to 2 years in federal prison. He showed no reaction. Lockhart, seated in the gallery, showed none either. She didn't need to. The record spoke for itself. The civil case never reached trial. Sterling Atlantic's attorneys reviewed the evidence, the emails, the complaint history, the training failures, the video now seen by tens of millions of people, and advised the airline's board that going before a jury would be catastrophic. They settled. The total was $3.5 million, $1.8 million in direct damages to Judge Lockhart for unlawful detention, racial discrimination, emotional distress, and reputational harm. The remaining $1.7 million was allocated to fund systemic reforms mandated as part of the settlement agreement. The required changes were specific and binding. Sterling Atlantic was to establish an independent oversight board with authority to review all crew complaints involving allegations of discrimination. Quarterly bias training would be mandatory for every member of cabin crew, with written testing and documented completion. Failure to complete training would result in suspension. A passenger bill of rights would be printed and posted visibly on every aircraft in the fleet. A zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory service would be implemented with termination on first confirmed offense. No warnings, no reassignments, no second chances. And the airline CEO would deliver a public apology on camera, read in full, broadcast on the company's website and social media channels, acknowledging the systemic failures that had allowed Pennington's behavior to continue unchecked for nearly a decade. Lockhart sat in Ferreira's office when the settlement was finalized. She reviewed every clause. Then she made a decision about the money. She donated her entire portion to a foundation she established herself. She called it the Equal Skies Initiative. Its purpose was to provide free legal representation to airline passengers who experienced racial discrimination and didn't have the resources or the title to fight back on their own. Because Lockhart understood something clearly, she had been heard because of who she was. The foundation would exist for everyone who wasn't. Craig Pennington served 18 months in federal prison and was released on good behavior. He never issued a public apology, never acknowledged what he had done, never expressed remorse to Lockhart or to any of the passengers he had mistreated over the years. His name became a case study. Airline training programs across the country incorporated the incident into mandatory modules on bias, discrimination, and abuse of crew authority. His mugshot appeared beside the footage. His emails were quoted in slides. He became the example of exactly what the industry could no longer afford to ignore. Officer Vince Delano resigned from the airport police 3 months after the consent agreement was finalized. He left law enforcement entirely. He gave no interviews and made no public statements. His partner had already transferred to a different division before the trial began. Nora Saunders, the junior flight attendant who had stood in the aisle and said nothing while a federal judge was humiliated and handcuffed, gave a public interview 6 months after the settlement. She described the moment Pennington told her to watch Lockhart in case she became aggressive. She said she knew immediately it was wrong. She said her hands were shaking. She said she opened her mouth and nothing came out. She cried during the interview. She now works as a trainer for a national airline crew advocacy group, teaching cabin staff how to intervene when they witness discrimination by a colleague. The white businessman from 3C, a corporate executive named Leonard Ashford, wrote an op-ed for a national newspaper. He described watching the entire incident unfold from 3 feet away. He described speaking up once and being told to stay out of it. He described sitting in silence while Lockhart was cuffed and walked off the plane. He called it the moment he understood that witnessing injustice and doing the minimum were not the same thing. Lockhart returned to the bench. The civil rights case she had been flying home to preside over resulted in a landmark ruling that was cited in federal courts for years after. She never gave a single public interview about the flight, never wrote about it, never appeared on a panel or a podcast. She let the footage, the verdict, and the record speak for themselves. Sterling Atlantic's internal training video now opens with a single clip from that flight. Pennington standing in the galley with his arms crossed while a federal judge is led past him in handcuffs. The screen holds on the image for 5 seconds before a caption appears. This is what failure looks like. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.
Don't look away from me. I asked you a question. You're going to answer it right now.
Sir, we didn't do anything. We're just
Don't talk
waiting
back.
for
I know how
our
this goes. You kids think rules don't apply to you.
This is my iPad. It's ours.
Funny how you all say the same thing. Hand it over before I make this real ugly.
Please.
At 12:47 p.m., inside a McDonald's on Broad Street in suburban Richmond, Virginia, 3 black children sat in a corner booth, sharing a 20-piece nugget box and laughing over their iPads. Elijah was 12. Naomi was 10. Isaiah had just turned 7. They were well-dressed, well-mannered, and completely absorbed in their screens, the kind of quiet Saturday scene that wouldn't draw a second glance from anyone paying attention. Their iPads were brand new, still in bright-colored cases, gifts from their grandmother for straight-A report cards. Their grandmother was Judge Vivian Hartwell, 67 years old, a sitting federal judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals with 31 years on the bench. She had stepped away briefly to use the restroom, leaving the kids with their food and a simple instruction to stay in the booth. The restaurant was busy with the usual weekend crowd. Families with strollers, teenagers crowding the drink station, a few solo diners scrolling through their phones. Nobody was bothering anyone. Nobody was out of line. But near the front counter, a white woman had stopped eating her salad and was staring hard at the 3 children across the dining room. Her name was Karen Lipscomb, 54, and something about those kids and those iPads had already made her decide that what she was seeing didn't add up. Lipscomb stood and walked directly to the counter, where shift manager Devin Osei, 23, was restocking napkin dispensers. She leaned in and told him those kids over there had stolen those iPads out of someone's bag. Devin looked over at the booth. 3 children eating chicken nuggets and watching cartoons. He asked which customer was missing property. Lipscomb didn't answer the question. She said it again, louder this time, that she saw them take the iPads and that if this restaurant didn't do something about it, she would call corporate and report the entire staff for allowing theft. Devin hesitated. He had seen the children come in with their grandmother. He had taken their order himself. The iPads had been in the kids' hands the entire time. No customer had reported anything stolen. No one in the restaurant was looking for missing property, but Lipscomb was loud and getting louder, and Devin was 6 months into a job he couldn't afford to lose. He asked her one more time if she was sure. She told him to stop asking questions and call the police before those kids walked out with somebody else's property. Devin picked up the store phone and dialed 911. The call was recorded. Every word of it would later be played in a federal courtroom. Officer Russell Brandt pulled into the McDonald's parking lot 6 minutes after the 911 call. He was 2 years old with 18 years on the Richmond Metro Police Department. His service record told one story to his supervisors and a very different one to the communities he patrolled. Over the past 14 years, 31 formal complaints had been filed against him, disproportionately from Black and Latino residents. The allegations followed a pattern: excessive force during routine stops, aggressive language during encounters that didn't require aggression, racial slurs caught on a dash cam during a traffic stop 3 years earlier, footage that was mysteriously lost during the internal review process. He had been suspended twice, both times reduced to written reprimands after the police union intervened on his behalf. His supervisors had signed off on every dismissal, every reduced punishment, every second chance. Brandt had learned over the years that complaints didn't stick and consequences didn't come. His body camera was activated when he stepped out of his patrol car. The footage would later show him entering the restaurant, walking past a white family of 5 near the door, past a group of white teenagers by the soda fountain, past 2 elderly white couples sitting near the windows. He didn't stop at the counter to speak with Devin. He didn't look for Lipscomb to get a description or details. He walked directly across the dining room toward the only black children in the restaurant, 3 kids sitting in a corner booth with Happy Meals and iPads. Brandt stopped at the edge of the booth and stood at full height, looking down at the 3 of them. His hand rested on his duty belt. Elijah looked up first. Brandt asked where they got the iPads. Elijah answered politely, telling the officer they were his and his brothers and sisters, that their grandmother had bought them as gifts for their report cards. Brandt didn't acknowledge the answer. He looked at the devices, then back at Elijah, and asked how much he thought those iPads cost. Elijah didn't respond. Brandt leaned in closer and asked whether anyone in his family even had jobs. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. She looked at her older brother for reassurance, but Elijah's face had gone still, the kind of stillness a 12-year-old learns when he realizes the adult in front of him isn't interested in the truth. Isaiah, the youngest, pulled his iPad tight against his chest with both hands. Brandt pointed at the devices and told all 3 children to hand them over immediately, calling them suspected stolen property. Elijah asked if they could please wait for their grandmother. She was just in the restroom. Brandt said no. He said they could cooperate now or things would get a lot worse. Around them, the restaurant had gone quiet. Families had stopped eating. Conversations had dropped to whispers. At least 4 customers had already raised their phones and started recording. None of the children moved. They sat in that booth, food getting cold, waiting for an adult who would actually listen. Elijah didn't refuse. He hesitated. That was all. A 12-year-old boy looking down at the iPad his grandmother had given him, trying to understand why a police officer was demanding he hand over his own property. That hesitation lasted less than 2 seconds. Brandt reached across the table, grabbed Elijah's wrist, and yanked the iPad out of his hands. The motion was fast and hard enough that Elijah's shoulder jerked forward and his elbow knocked over a drink cup, sending orange soda across the tray. Isaiah screamed. Not a defiant scream, not a tantrum. The scream of a 7-year-old watching a grown man in uniform grab his brother. Brandt turned to the youngest child and pointed directly at his face. "Shut your mouth before I give you something to cry about." Naomi was frozen, tears running down both cheeks, her iPad sitting on the table in front of her. Brandt picked it up out of her trembling hands without a word. Isaiah was still holding his, both arms wrapped around it, pressing it into his small chest like it could protect him. Brandt reached down and pried the child's fingers off one by one. When Isaiah still wouldn't let go, Brandt pulled the device free and shoved the boy backward into the booth seat. The back of Isaiah's head hit the wall behind the booth with a sound that made the woman in the next table gasp. A man near the counter stood up and shouted, "They're children!" Brandt turned toward the dining room, pointed at the crowd, and said anyone who interfered would be arrested for obstruction of justice. He keyed his radio and reported 3 juvenile suspects, possible theft, uncooperative, requesting backup. All 3 children were sobbing. Their Happy Meals sat untouched. The iPads were stacked on the table behind Brandt's back like evidence from a crime scene that never existed. Officer Nina Saldano, 29, walked through the front door 4 minutes later. She had been with the department for just under 3 years. What she saw when she entered was not what dispatch had described. There were no juvenile suspects. There was no theft in progress. There were 3 children crying in a booth, a crowd of visibly upset customers, several phones recording from different angles, and her senior officer standing over the scene with 3 iPads lined up on the table behind him like confiscated contraband. Saldana moved to Brant's side and spoke quietly. She told him this looked like a misunderstanding. She said maybe they should talk to the manager and figure out what actually happened before going any further. Brant didn't lower his voice. "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, rookie. These kids are lying." Saldana looked at the children. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the phones pointed in their direction, and she stepped back. She did not intervene. She did not challenge him again. She stood to the side and watched what happened next. Brant told Elijah to stand up. The boy stood slowly, legs unsteady. Brant turned him around and patted him down in front of the entire restaurant. Hands across the boy's pockets, his waistband, his sides. A 12-year-old in a McDonald's being searched like a suspect on a street corner. When Brant was done, he asked all 3 children for identification. They stared at him. They had none. They were children. Brant stepped back to his radio and called dispatch again. He requested a juvenile transport unit and stated his intention to take all 3 minors into custody for theft and uncooperative behavior. In the booth, Naomi held Isaiah's hand. Elijah stood where Brant had left him, arms at his sides, staring at the floor. He didn't say a word. The restroom door opened, and Judge Vivian Hartwell stepped back into the dining room. She had been gone less than 5 minutes. What she walked into was nothing close to what she had left behind. Her 3 grandchildren were crying. Elijah was standing near the booth with his arms at his sides, face blank. Naomi and Isaiah were pressed together in the seat, holding hands. A uniformed officer stood over them with their iPads stacked on the table behind his back. A second officer stood off to the side doing nothing. The restaurant was silent except for the sound of her grandchildren sobbing. Vivian crossed the dining room without hesitation. "What is happening to my grandchildren?" Brant turned. "Ma'am, step back. These children are being detained." Vivian did not step back. She stopped directly in front of him and spoke clearly and without raising her voice. She gave her full name. She told him she was the children's grandmother. She told him the iPads were their personal property, purchased by her 2 weeks ago as gifts for their report cards, and that she had the receipts on her phone if he wanted to see them. Brant cut her off before she could finish. "I don't care who you say you are. I've heard every story in the book. You people always have an excuse." He told her that if she didn't step back immediately, she would be placed under arrest for interfering with a police investigation. Vivian did not move. She looked at him with the kind of stillness that comes from 3 decades of sitting behind a federal bench and hearing every lie, every excuse, and every abuse of authority a courtroom can produce. She said, "I am a federal judge on the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. You are unlawfully detaining 3 minor children without probable cause, and everything you are doing is being recorded, including by your own body camera." Brant laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable chuckle, a full, open, dismissive laugh captured in high-definition audio by the body camera mounted on his own chest. A federal judge. "Right, and I'm the president." He told Vivian to sit down or he would put her in handcuffs too. The body camera recorded her expression. It did not change. Vivian asked for his badge number. He refused. She asked for his name. He refused. She asked for his supervisor's name. He told her she wasn't in charge here and to stop asking questions. Vivian reached into her purse, took out her phone, and dialed 911. She identified herself by name and title. She requested that a patrol supervisor be sent to the McDonald's on Broad Street immediately. She stated that an officer was unlawfully detaining her 3 minor grandchildren without probable cause and had used physical force against them. She then made a second call. This one was to her son, Colonel Terrence Hartwell, the children's father, a Judge Advocate General officer stationed at Fort Lee, 30 minutes south. She told him what was happening in 3 short sentences. He said he was on his way. Outside in the parking lot, Officer Saldano had already stepped away from the door. She stood near her patrol car and keyed her radio to dispatch. She asked them to run a name: Vivian Hartwell, federal judge, 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. The response came back in under 2 minutes. Dispatch confirmed the name, the title, the court, and the active appointment. Saldano lowered her radio and stood still in the parking lot. The color had drained from her face. She looked back through the glass doors at Brandt, still standing over the booth, and understood exactly what was about to happen. Sergeant Dale Compton, 48, pulled into the McDonald's parking lot 14 minutes after the first call. He had been with the department for 22 years and held a supervisory role over patrol officers in the district. Before he could reach the front door, Saldano stepped into his path. She spoke quickly and quietly. She told him the grandmother of the children inside had identified herself as a federal judge. She told him dispatch had confirmed it. Vivian Hartwell, 4th Circuit Court of Appeals, active appointment. Compton stopped walking. He looked at Saldano for a long moment without speaking. Then he went inside. The body camera footage from Brandt's chest would later show Compton crossing the dining room in 4 seconds. He walked directly to Brandt and told him to step away from the family. Now, Brandt turned. He started to explain the situation: the call, the iPads, the children's refusal to cooperate. Compton cut him off. "Step away from the family, officer. That is an order." Brandt's jaw tightened. He held his ground for a beat, then stepped back. But his body camera picked up what he said under his breath as he moved. "Doesn't matter who she is. Those kids had no business with that kind of stuff." The microphone was 3 inches from his mouth. Every word was recorded. Compton approached Vivian, lowered his voice, and attempted to de-escalate. He returned the 3 iPads to the children. He apologized for the interaction and said the department would look into what had occurred. Vivian handed 1 iPad to Naomi, 1 to Isaiah, and 1 to Elijah. Then she looked at Compton and told him she was not accepting his apology. She said this was not a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling of 3 children. This was physical aggression against minors. Her youngest grandson's head had been slammed into a wall. Her oldest grandson had been patted down in a public restaurant, and every moment of it was going to be addressed formally, thoroughly, and publicly. Compton nodded but said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The first cell phone video hit social media before the Hartwell family had even left the parking lot. It was posted by a college student named Aisha Cohn, 20, who had been sitting 2 booths away eating a McFlurry when Brandt walked in. Her phone had been recording from the moment Brandt grabbed Elijah's wrist. The footage ran just over 9 minutes. It captured the grab, Isaiah's scream, Brandt telling a 7-year-old to shut his mouth, the moment Isaiah's head hit the wall, the pat-down of a 12-year-old boy, Vivian's arrival, her calm identification as a federal judge, and Brandt's laugh. That single video reached 2 million views within 48 hours. It was shared across every major platform. News outlets picked it up the same day. Local affiliates ran segments that evening. National networks followed by morning. The headline wrote itself: the McDonald's had 6 security cameras covering the dining room from different angles. All 6 were recording that Saturday afternoon. When attorneys for the Hartwell family filed a preservation request, the footage was subpoenaed within the week. It showed everything. Every angle confirmed what the cell phone videos had already made public. Brandt's body camera footage was requested through official channels the same day the story broke. The Richmond Metro Police Department did not release it. A spokesperson issued a statement saying the footage was part of an ongoing internal investigation and could not be made available at that time. Civil rights organizations called the delay a cover-up. Legal analysts pointed out that the department had no legal obligation to withhold the footage and every reason to suppress it. Online petitions demanding its release gathered over 300,000 signatures in 5 days. The pressure was building from every direction, and the department had no good options left. The footage existed. The public knew it existed, and no amount of delay was going to change what was on it. The Richmond Metro Police Department released its first public statement 48 hours after the videos went viral. It read like every department statement that had ever been written after a scandal broke too fast to contain. We take all allegations of misconduct seriously and are conducting a thorough and transparent review of the incident. We are committed to the highest standards of professionalism and community trust. No names were mentioned, no specifics were given, no accountability was acknowledged. The police union followed with its own statement the next day, calling Officer Brandt a dedicated veteran of the force and defending what it described as his right to investigate a reported crime. The union emphasized that Brandt had responded to a 911 call and followed standard procedures for handling a theft complaint. What the union did not address was what happened after he arrived. The 911 call itself was obtained through a public records request filed by a local journalist within 72 hours. The recording was 3 minutes and 14 seconds long. In it, Devin Osei's voice was hesitant, uncertain. He told the dispatcher that a customer had reported a possible theft involving children in the dining room. When the dispatcher asked what evidence there was, Devin paused. He said he wasn't sure. He said a customer had insisted. That was the entire basis for the call. No description of stolen property, no identified victim, no crime observed by any employee. Devin gave a full statement to the press the following week. He said he never believed the children had stolen anything. He said he had watched them come in with their grandmother, had taken their order himself, and had seen the iPads in their hands the entire time. He said he made the call because Karen Lipscomb had threatened to report him to corporate, and he was afraid of losing his job. Lipscomb was identified online within days. Her name, her photo, and her role in the 911 call became public knowledge through social media and news coverage. She issued no public comment. She deleted her social media accounts and did not respond to interview requests. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation into Brandt's conduct. He was placed on paid administrative leave, which drew its own wave of outrage. Community groups held a rally outside the police department's central office. Civil rights organizations issued joint statements demanding Brandt's immediate termination and criminal prosecution. The department said nothing further. The silence only made it louder. Judge Vivian Hartwell understood the legal system better than almost anyone involved. She had spent 31 years presiding over federal cases, including civil rights matters, constitutional disputes, and cases involving law enforcement misconduct. She knew exactly what needed to happen, and she knew she could not be the one to do it. She recused herself from any proceedings connected to the incident and instead connected her son, Colonel Terrence Hartwell, with civil rights attorney Diane Achebe. Achebe was 51 years old and had spent 2 decades building a national reputation as one of the most effective litigators in police misconduct and civil rights violations against minors. She had argued cases before federal appellate courts, had secured multi-million-dollar settlements against 3 major metropolitan police departments, and had never lost a case involving documented use of force against a child. She reviewed the evidence in the Hartwell case and told the family it was among the most clear-cut she had ever seen. Achebe filed a federal civil rights lawsuit seeking $8.4 million in damages. The defendants named in the suit were Officer Russell Brandt personally, Officer Nina Saldano for failure to intervene and protect the children, the Richmond Metro Police Department for systemic failure to discipline and supervise, and the City of Richmond for institutional negligence. The complaint cited unlawful detention of 3 minor children without probable cause, excessive force against minors, racial profiling, emotional and psychological harm, assault on a minor resulting in physical injury, specifically the impact of Isaiah's head against the wall, and a documented pattern of ignored complaints that had enabled Brandt's behavior over more than a decade. All 3 children underwent independent psychological evaluations conducted by board-certified child psychologists. The results were consistent across all 3. Elijah, 12, had become withdrawn and refused to go to public places without a parent or grandparent present. Naomi, 10, experienced episodes of anxiety in the presence of authority figures and had difficulty sleeping. Isaiah, 7, had developed a pronounced fear of uniformed officers. He flinched at the sound of sirens. He had recurring nightmares about a man in uniform taking things from his hands. He had asked his father more than once whether the police were going to come back for him. He was 7 years old. The discovery phase broke the case wide open. Achebe's team subpoenaed 14 years of internal records, and what came back was a paper trail of institutional failure, so thorough it read like a manual on how to protect bad officers. Brandt's file contained 31 formal complaints: excessive force, racially charged language, disproportionate targeting of Black and Latino residents. Each complaint had been reviewed by Internal Affairs. Each one had been dismissed. Dashcam footage from a 2021 traffic stop in which Brandt used a racial slur had been logged into the evidence system and then marked as corrupted. The file was never recovered. 2 officers who had previously reported Brandt's behavior were identified in the records. One was transferred to a less desirable precinct within 3 months. The other received his first negative performance review in 8 years, 6 weeks after raising concerns. Saldano's own records became part of the case. 3 months before the McDonald's incident, she had submitted a written report flagging Brandt's racially motivated behavior during calls they had responded to together. Her supervisor acknowledged receipt in an email. No action was taken. The department's Internal Affairs Division was subjected to an independent audit. Over the previous 10 years, 89% of racial profiling complaints had been dismissed without discipline. The rate for complaints filed by Black civilians against white officers was 91%. Expert witnesses testified on the psychological impact of police aggression on Black children. Dr. Lenora Graves, a child psychologist specializing in racial trauma, presented studies showing that aggressive law enforcement encounters during childhood produced lasting effects: heightened anxiety, chronic distrust, withdrawal from public spaces. She testified that all 3 Hartwell children exhibited those symptoms. Elijah had told his parents he didn't want to go outside without an adult anymore. He had stopped walking home from school with friends. He was 12 years old. Brandt was terminated. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. A federal grand jury indicted him on 3 counts of assault on a minor, unlawful detention, and deprivation of rights under color of law. He pleaded not guilty. His attorney argued he had responded to a legitimate 911 call and followed procedure. The trial lasted 9 days. The jury saw everything: body camera footage showing him grab a 12-year-old's wrist, shout at a 7-year-old, pry a child's fingers off an iPad, and shove that child into a wall. 6 angles of McDonald's security footage, cell phone videos from 4 customers, the 911 call that started it all, 3 minutes of a shift manager reporting a complaint he never believed, and Brandt's own words captured by his own equipment. Those kids had no business with that kind of stuff. The jury deliberated less than 5 hours. Guilty on all counts, 4 years federal prison. Saldano was fired for failure to intervene. 2 supervisors who dismissed prior complaints were demoted. The police chief was forced to resign after records showed he had personally signed off on dismissing 14 complaints against Brandt over 7 years, including the lost dashcam footage. The city of Richmond settled the civil lawsuit for the full $8.4 million. No negotiation, no reduced offer. The footage was indefensible, and every attorney in the city's legal office knew it. The Hartwell family used a portion of the settlement to establish the Hartwell Children's Justice Initiative, a nonprofit providing free legal representation and trauma counseling to children who had been subjected to police misconduct. Diane Achebe joined the advisory board. Within its first year, the initiative took on 37 cases across Virginia, most of them involving Black and Latino minors who had been stopped, searched, or detained without cause. Elijah continued therapy twice a week. Progress was slow, but it was real. He started walking to school again. He began talking to friends about what happened instead of going quiet when the subject came up. One evening after dinner, he told his grandmother he wanted to be a lawyer. Vivian looked at him for a long moment and told him he could be whatever he wanted to be. Isaiah still flinched at sirens. His therapist said the response was involuntary and would take time. He slept with a nightlight now and sometimes crawled into his father's bed after a bad dream. He was 7. Naomi wrote a letter to her school about what had happened in the McDonald's that Saturday afternoon. Her teacher helped her revise it. The local paper published it on the front page of the community section. She was 10 years old, and her words were clearer than most of the statements the police department had released. The McDonald's on Broad Street installed a small plaque near the corner booth. It read, "Every child deserves to feel safe." The Richmond Metro Police Department entered a federal consent decree requiring independent civilian oversight, quarterly bias audits, mandatory de-escalation training for all officers, and a zero-tolerance policy for complaints involving minors. Body camera compliance became subject to random monthly review with automatic suspension for violations. Brant walked into a McDonald's and saw 3 black children with iPads. He didn't see kids, he saw suspects. A federal judge saw her grandchildren crying, and a jury saw the truth. If you think this situation was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right-hand side.